There's a new war being fought. Not with bombs, but with chips, tariffs, and algorithms. From Washington to Beijing, world powers are no longer competing on battlefields. They're fighting in boardrooms, data centers, and global markets. This isn't just about trade deals or tech bans. It's about who controls the future. And just like the original Cold War, the stakes are global. America wants to slow China's rise. China wants to build a world it no longer needs US permission to operate in. Caught in the middle, the rest of the world. So, what triggered this modern-day Cold War? How are trade and technology being weaponized? And who's really gaining power while the headlines scream conflict? Let's break it all down, because this war is already underway. The term Cold War instantly brings to mind the decades-long standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. But today's version is different. Quieter, smarter, and far more complex. Instead of nuclear warheads, we now have semiconductors and supply chain. Instead of spies and trench coats, we have cyber attacks and economic espionage. Instead of physical walls, there are digital firewalls, export bans, and investment restrictions. At the center of this new Cold War are two superpowers, the US and China. One is trying to maintain global dominance, and the other is trying to reshape the world order in its own image. What started as a trade dispute in 2018, with tariffs, sanctions, and a battle over steel and soybeans, has now evolved into a full-spectrum strategic conflict. From TikTok bans to Huawei blacklists, from chip export controls to AI restrictions, every major sector is becoming a battlefield. But here's what makes it more dangerous than the original Cold War. The US and China are deeply economically interlinked. Cutting ties risks global recession, not just political posturing. The world's biggest tech firms rely on Chinese factories, and China's innovation engine still depends on Western components. This isn't just about ideology, it's about who gets to shape the rules of the next century. So before we ask who's winning, we need to understand how this war is being fought, especially on the trade and tech front lines. Trade was the first battlefield in this new Cold War, and it's still one of the most active. It began with US tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum, followed by a wave of restrictions on everything from solar panels to washing machines. The Trump administration claimed it was about protecting American jobs, but underneath it was a move to check China's growing industrial dominance. China hit back with its own tariffs, targeting US agriculture, tech, and energy. Suddenly, American farmers, Silicon Valley giants, and even automakers were caught in the crossfire. Billions of dollars in trade were disrupted. Then came sanctions. Washington blacklisted firms like Huawei, ZTE, and more recently YMTC, citing national security threats. But in practice, it was a clear message. We'll cut you off from the tech you need. China didn't stay silent. It retaliated with rare earth export controls, data localization laws, and restrictions on US consulting and audit firms. The message: if you isolate us, we'll isolate you too. Meanwhile, global supply chains once built on efficiency are being rebuilt around resilience and geopolitical loyalty. Companies are reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring, moving production out of China and into countries like India, Vietnam, and Mexico. But this isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about control. Trade is now a tool of foreign policy, a weapon of economic warfare. And both sides are learning that when you weaponize the global economy, there are no clean wins, only collateral damage. If trade is the battlefield, then technology is the nuclear weapon of this new Cold War. At the heart of this tech war is one word: semiconductors. These tiny chips power everything, from smartphones and fighter jets, to AI algorithms and quantum computing. And both the US and China know that whoever controls chips controls the future. That's why Washington has blocked China's access to advanced chip-making tools, especially from companies like ASML, NVIDIA, and TSMC. Through a mix of export controls, sanctions, and pressure on allies, the US is trying to freeze China out of the bleeding edge of technology. But China isn't sitting back. It's pouring hundreds of billions into its own chip industry, building domestic fabs, backing companies like SMIC, and rapidly closing the gap in AI research. It's also using its massive domestic market to push out Western tech, replacing US software with local alternatives, and even banning iPhones in some government offices. AI is another front. The US wants to lead, but China has the data and the political will to deploy AI at scale, from surveillance to smart cities. The tech war isn't just about innovation, it's about control over data, infrastructure, and influence. And as each side builds its own parallel internet, its own chip industry, and its own standards, the risk is clear. We're not just splitting markets, we're splitting the future. As the US and China escalate their confrontation, the rest of the world is being forced to choose sides, or play both. Countries like India, Vietnam, and Mexico are emerging as unexpected winners. Global companies are shifting manufacturing away from China, and these nations are grabbing investment, talent, and attention. India, for example, is positioning itself as a major chip and electronics hub, boosted by both US cooperation and China's isolation. Meanwhile, Europe and Japan are walking a tightrope. They rely on US security guarantees, but depend heavily on Chinese trade. The EU talks about de-risking, not decoupling, but that balance is growing harder by the day. Taiwan and South Korea, central to the global semiconductor supply chain, are in a geopolitical squeeze. Their fabs are vital, but their locations are dangerously close to conflict zones. For developing nations, the split between US-led and China-led tech ecosystems creates tough choices. Join one side and risk alienating the other. Stay neutral and risk being left behind altogether. So who's winning? It's too early to tell. The US still leads in chip design and AI breakthroughs. China leads in scale, data, and long-term planning. But one thing is clear. Global power is no longer just military. It's economic, technological, and digital. And in this new Cold War, influence is the real currency. This isn't a war fought with tanks and troops. It's a war of systems, markets, and ideas. As the US and China redraw the global map through trade and technology, every nation, company, and citizen is being pulled into the struggle, whether they realize it or not. The original Cold War lasted decades. This one might last even longer, and reshape everything. If this breakdown helped you understand the stakes, hit like, subscribe to Winning Spec, and turn on notifications. We decode the world's most critical conflicts, so you see what's really going on behind the headlines. Comment below which side do you think will shape the future, or is the real power shifting somewhere else entirely? Because in this war, silence is not neutrality, it's strategy.